My love, something strange has surfaced, strange enough that it doesn't sound real when you say it out loud, and yet the moment you hear it, you start remembering everything you thought you forgot. It begins with your mouth. Not your smile in photos. Not the shape people compliment. Not lipstick, not teeth, not the obvious things strangers can clock in a second and pretend they know you. This is smaller than that. Sharper. Almost unfair. It's about what your mouth does when you're about to tell the truth and you decide, at the last second, to keep it in. And someone already knows. Your soulmate didn't expect to learn this. They were told like it was nothing. Like it was an observation anyone could have made if they were around you often enough. Like it was just a quirky little detail, a harmless pattern, the kind of thing people mention casually while laughing. But the person who said it didn't laugh. They said it carefully. Like they weren't sure they should be saying it at all. And that's what changed the temperature of the room. Because your soulmate realized immediately, this wasn't a guess. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't a vibe. It was something noticed with precision. The person described it in a way that made your soulmate's throat tighten. They said, right before they say something honest, something they mean in a way they can't undo, their lips go still. Not tense. Not pressed. Just, still. Like they pause the world for half a second. Like they're listening for whether it's safe. Safe. That word did something to your soulmate. Because your soulmate has spent longer than they admit wondering what makes you feel safe. Not in a dramatic way. Not, tell me your traumas right now, safe. Something subtler. The kind of safe that shows up in the body before it shows up in language. Your soulmate tried to keep their face neutral. They tried to act like this wasn't landing. Like it wasn't rearranging old memories with new meanings. But then the person continued. They said you have a second tell, too. It appears when you're pretending something doesn't matter. You do it elegantly. You do it like a person who doesn't want to make anyone responsible for your feelings. You smile. You soften your voice. You move the conversation forward. You make everything look normal. But your mouth delays the smile. Just a fraction. A tiny hesitation before warmth arrives. Like your heart flinches first and then your manners cover it. Most people don't catch it. Most people aren't looking there. They're listening to your words and thinking that's the only place truth lives. But this person noticed the gap. That gap between feeling and performance. And your soulmate went very quiet. Because suddenly they remembered a moment with you that never made sense. A day that didn't feel dramatic at the time. A conversation that ended politely. A normal sentence you said, calmly, in the right tone, with the right expression, and yet your soulmate had replayed it for months with a vague sense that something was unfinished. They never understood why. Until now. Until a stranger described the exact same pause your soulmate had seen with their own eyes and dismissed, because it was too small to build a theory around, and your soulmate isn't the kind of person who likes to make stories out of shadows. But then this person said something that made your soulmate stop trying to be skeptical. They explained how they found out. Not through one moment. Through repetition. Different places. Different conversations. Different topics. The same tiny pause showing up only when something emotionally important brushed against your life. They didn't say your mouth reveals secrets. They said your mouth reveals timing. And timing is the part people underestimate, because timing is where the truth lives before the mind can edit it. Your expression, the person said, shows the instant they arrive at the answer internally, and then decide whether to give it to you. That's when your soulmate felt the first piece click into place. Not certainty. Recognition. Because your soulmate has watched you hold words back. Not in a manipulative way. Not in a cold way. In a careful way. In a way that suggests you know words can change a room, and you don't throw that kind of power around casually. But here's what made it matter now. Your soulmate asked the obvious question, the one that came out of their mouth before they could stop it. Why are you telling me this today? The person didn't answer right away. They looked away first, as if they were sorting through whether they were about to break a rule. Then they said, because it happened again. Recently. Your soulmate's chest tightened. They didn't want to care. They didn't want to lean in. They didn't want to become the kind of person who treats someone else's micro-expression like scripture. And still, they leaned in. They asked, when? The person said, someone mentioned you. Just that. Someone mentioned your soulmate's name, casually, in a group conversation you were part of. Nothing romantic. Nothing obvious. No one turned and stared at you waiting for a reaction. Almost no one noticed anything. Almost. But this person did. They said, their mouth did the thing. That tiny pause. That hesitation that happens before they decide what they can afford to feel out loud. Your soulmate didn't respond immediately. Because now the conversation wasn't about your mouth. It was about the possibility that you've been holding something in your body that your words never agreed to carry. And your soulmate couldn't stop their mind from doing what it always does in moments like this. It started replaying scenes. One in particular. You and your soulmate, alone, standing too close to a future neither of you knew how to talk about. A conversation that sounded simple on the surface. Your soulmate had said something like, someday, life might take us in the same direction. You had answered something calm. Something polite. And there had been a pause. Your mouth had gone still. Then you'd smiled. Then you'd changed the subject. Your soulmate had told themselves you were uncertain. That you didn't feel the same. That the conversation was too much for you. That you were gently closing a door. But now your soulmate wondered, quietly, almost painfully, what if you weren't closing a door? What if you were standing in it, feeling the weight of what could happen if you walked through? And the person who noticed all of this person was not describing a romantic vibe. They were describing a pattern. Which is why your soulmate asked the next question, the question that revealed everything about why this observation had any credibility at all. How could you even notice that? The person said, because I learned to. And then they finally told your soulmate the part that changed everything. They weren't just some random friend who happened to be perceptive. They were a professional interpreter. Not the dramatic kind people imagine. Not spy movie nonsense. A real one. The kind who sits slightly to the side in rooms where language has to travel in more than one direction. The kind of person trained to watch faces and mouths because sometimes sound isn't the main channel. They said, "I grew up reading lips. My sister is deaf." You learn fast that people say one thing with their voice and another thing with their mouth. You learn that the smallest shifts matter. And you learn to watch the moment before the sentence begins, because that's where the real decision is. Your soulmate felt heat rise behind their eyes, which annoyed them immediately, because they weren't trying to be emotional. They were trying to understand. The interpreter continued, quieter now. At first I wasn't studying them. I was just noticing. The way they listen. The way they choose words like they're trying not to hurt anyone by accident. The way they test a sentence silently before they let it out. Test a sentence. Your soulmate thought of you, the way you sometimes inhale as if you're about to speak, then exhale and say something safer. The interpreter said, and then I started seeing it around you. Not every time. But enough times that it stopped being random. Your soulmate's hands went cold. Because that meant something worse than being the subject of a casual observation. It meant you had a reaction tied to them that was consistent enough to be recognizable. Your soulmate asked, "Does anyone else know you noticed?" "No," the interpreter said immediately. "They don't know." That mattered. Because it meant your face wasn't doing this for attention. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't you trying to send a signal. It was you being human when you thought no one was reading the silent parts. And then the interpreter said something that cut through every attempt your soulmate was making to stay composed. It changed. Your soulmate blinked. What changed? The timing, the interpreter said. Before, the pause happened after your name. Recently, it started happening before. Your soulmate didn't understand at first. So the interpreter explained it in a way that made your soulmate's chest tighten so hard it was almost physically painful. They said there was a conversation. Someone asked you, casually, in a group setting, what you wanted next in life. The next chapter. The next version. The next environment. The kind of people you wanted around you. You didn't talk about love. You didn't talk about romance. You didn't say anyone's name. But before you answered, your mouth went still. That same stillness. Then you smiled, small, reluctant, like you didn't want to announce you'd already been thinking about it. And only after you'd answered, only after you'd described the qualities you wanted, someone else, without thinking, brought up your soulmate's name. And in that moment you went completely still again. Not startled. Not confused. Still. As if the thought had already been in the room before anyone spoke it aloud. Your soulmate stared at the interpreter like they were trying to decide whether this was too much information. Because it was too much. Not in a scandalous way. In a sacred way. In the way you're not supposed to touch someone else's inner life without their permission. Your soulmate finally said, quietly, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The interpreter looked at them for a long time. Then they said, "Because they asked me not to." Your soulmate's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" The interpreter swallowed. Then, carefully, they said, "Once, months ago, I realized I'd been paying attention. Not in a creepy way. Just in the way I do when I'm interpreting and I need to understand what isn't being said. And I guess, my eyes lingered. They noticed. They caught me." Your soulmate's stomach turned. They imagined you seeing someone watch you too closely, and the immediate instinct to guard yourself. The interpreter said, "They smiled at me. Not angry. Not offended. Just, aware. And they said, 'Don't make a story out of everything.'" Your soulmate almost laughed despite themselves, because they could hear your voice saying it. That exact mix of teasing and warning. But then the interpreter added, "And then they said, some things deserve time before they become a story." Time. Again. That word you seem to carry like a philosophy. And your soulmate's face went still, because they remembered something you had said recently, directly to them. Something small. Something that sounded like a general thought. Some things make more sense when the timing is right. Your soulmate had smiled at the time, because it sounded like you were talking about life. But now it sounded like you were talking about something you weren't ready to name. The interpreter continued, voice low. "They asked me for a promise." Your soulmate whispered, "What promise?" The interpreter hesitated, like they were about to either betray you or finally honor you. Then they said, "Please don't ask them anything because of me." Your soulmate inhaled sharply. Because that wasn't the behavior of someone playing games. That was the behavior of someone protecting something tender from becoming public entertainment. Someone who didn't want you pressured. Someone who didn't want your soulmate turned into a target of questions and teasing and speculation. Someone who wanted whatever this was, whatever it might become, to stay clean. The interpreter added, "And then they said something else. Something I didn't understand fully until yesterday." Your soulmate's voice was barely there. "What?" They said, "If they ever ask about me, don't tell them what you think. Tell them what you actually saw." Your soulmate's throat tightened. Because that was you, wasn't it? Not wanting anyone to speak for you. Not wanting your feelings interpreted into a story you didn't choose. Wanting the facts to remain facts until you were ready to make meaning out of them yourself. Your soulmate sat back, stunned. And then, after a long silence, they asked the question that had been quietly burning behind every other question. "What happened yesterday?" The interpreter's expression changed. Not dramatic. Just, waited. "They did something they haven't done before," the interpreter said. Your soulmate's stomach dropped. "What?" The interpreter answered in a way so simple it felt like it rearranged the air. "They started to say your name." Your soulmate didn't move. They didn't blink. They didn't even breathe properly. Because the idea of your mouth forming their name, before you stopped yourself, was not romantic in the glittery way people fantasize about. It was intimate in the human way. It meant your body almost crossed a line your mind pulled you back from. The interpreter said, it was right after they said that thing, about timing. Everyone else heard it like a general thought. But I watched their mouth after. Their lips shaped the beginning of a word. A name. Then they stopped. Like they decided they couldn't afford to let it out. Your soulmate put their hand over their mouth, suddenly aware of how absurd it was that this entire story was about mouths. And still, they asked. Are you sure? The interpreter shook their head immediately. No, they said. I'm not presenting it as certainty. I'm presenting it as what I saw. The shape. The timing. The almost sound. Then they exhaled, and their voice softened. And I'm telling you because something else happened after. Your soulmate's voice broke. What? The interpreter looked down, then back up. Someone overheard them, they said. Your soulmate's pulse jumped. After they walked away, the interpreter continued. Not during the group conversation. After. When they thought no one was near. Your soulmate felt a cold wave pass through them. Because there are two versions of a person, who they are in the room, and who they are in the hallway after. Your soulmate whispered, what did they say? The interpreter's eyes flicked away like they still didn't want to own this information. They said your name, they admitted. Quietly. Under their breath. Your soulmate's fingers curled into their palm. What else? The interpreter's voice dropped even lower. The person who overheard didn't catch the whole sentence, they said. But they remembered the end. And then they gave your soulmate the words that made everything go quiet inside them. When the moment comes. Your soulmate stared. Because now there were three pieces that shouldn't fit together and yet did. Your sentence, some things make more sense when the timing is right. The almost name. The whispered fragment. When the moment comes. Your soulmate could have made a story out of that. They could have taken it, twisted it, turned it into proof. But something steadier happened instead. They felt calmer. Because for the first time, the question stopped being, what does it mean? And became, what would make it safe enough for them to tell me themselves? Your soulmate didn't say that out loud. But the interpreter seemed to sense it anyway, because they leaned forward and said, I'm not telling you so you can confront them. Please don't. They didn't consent to being analyzed. Your soulmate nodded instantly, almost fiercely. I won't, they said. And the sincerity in their voice surprised even them. Because they weren't angry. They weren't possessive. They weren't hungry for a shortcut to certainty. They were protective. The interpreter watched their face for a moment, then said something that your soulmate didn't expect. Can I tell you the real reason I started noticing them? Your soulmate nodded. The interpreter's voice became careful again, like they were stepping into a memory. It wasn't because of romance, they said. It was because of contradiction. Their words are composed. But their mouth sometimes shows they're still deciding how much truth they can afford. Your soulmate swallowed. The interpreter continued, I've seen people hesitate because they're lying. This wasn't that. This was editing. Like they were trying to choose the version of the truth that would do the least damage. Damage. That word hit. Because your soulmate has always sensed that you carry responsibility in your mouth. Like you don't speak unless you're prepared to live with the consequence. The interpreter's eyes sharpened. And I saw it most when the conversation could change something. When a sentence could shift the future. When someone asked them about who they'd want beside them in the next chapter. Your soulmate whispered, did they ever mention me? The interpreter nodded slightly. Not often, they said. But more than once, in a way that sounded like they were talking about a person without naming a person. Your soulmate's chest tightened. What did they say? The interpreter thought for a moment. Then they said, once, someone described you, without saying your name, just qualities. And they asked what kind of person that sounded like. Your soulmate couldn't breathe properly. And, they managed. And they said, the interpreter answered, someone who notices more than they admit. Your soulmate let out a shaky exhale. Because it was true. Because you saw them, too, apparently. And the interpreter added something that made your soulmate's eyes sting. They asked about you once. A question that didn't sound romantic at all. It sounded like they were checking if you were real. Your soulmate looked up sharply. What question? The interpreter said, someone showed them something you did. Something kind. Quiet. When nobody important was watching. Your soulmate's stomach twisted with a strange ache. And they asked, after their mouth did that soft pause, that small hidden smile, have they always been like that? Your soulmate went completely still. Because that wasn't a question about attraction. That was a question about character. And suddenly, your soulmate understood something they hadn't understood before. If you hesitated around them, it might not have been because you didn't feel anything. It might have been because you felt something you didn't want to cheapen. Not by rushing it. Not by letting other people touch it. Not by turning it into a story before it could become a truth. Your soulmate sat there, silent, mind moving too fast to catch. Then they asked, so why now? Why is everyone suddenly talking about this? The interpreter's answer was quiet. Because they changed, they said. Your soulmate frowned. Changed how? The interpreter hesitated. Before, they said, they would pull back right after they said something meaningful. Like they regretted letting the sentence exist. Like they wanted to retrieve it. Your soulmate remembered moments like that. You'd say something real, then immediately soften it with a joke, or a casual shrug, or a different topic. And your soulmate would let you. Because they didn't want to push. Because they didn't want to be the reason you felt exposed. The interpreter continued, yesterday, someone asked if they regretted what they said about timing. Your soulmate's heart jumped. And they didn't dodge, the interpreter said. They didn't redirect. They didn't hide behind a smile that arrived late. Your soulmate leaned forward. What did they say? The interpreter met their eyes. They said, "No. I meant it." Your soulmate's throat tightened so hard they couldn't speak for a second. Because that, right there, was different. Not a confession. Not a declaration. But a person allowing their own words to stand. A person letting honesty exist without immediately punishing themselves for it. The interpreter exhaled. That's the condition they once described, they said. Your soulmate blinked. Condition? The interpreter nodded, slowly. They told me once, months ago. I'll know I'm ready when I can say what I mean without immediately wishing I could take it back. Your soulmate's eyes flashed with understanding so sudden it almost scared them. So all this time, you weren't waiting for them. You were waiting for you. Waiting for the moment when you could speak from a version of yourself that wouldn't collapse into regret the second the truth left your mouth. Your soulmate whispered, "And you think that moment is here?" The interpreter didn't smile. They didn't dramatize it. They just said, "I think it's closer than it's ever been." And then, as if the universe had decided your soulmate needed one more turn of the knife, the interpreter added, after they said, "I meant it," they asked me something. Your soulmate's voice was barely audible. What did they ask? The interpreter looked down, then back up, like they were choosing accuracy over comfort. They asked, "Have they changed too?" Your soulmate's lungs stalled. Because suddenly this wasn't just about you holding back. It was about you watching your soulmate for signs of readiness too. As if you didn't want to open a door only to find them still afraid of what might be on the other side. Your soulmate whispered, "What did you say?" The interpreter answered without hesitation. "I told them the truth," they said. "I said you've been different lately. More present. Less guarded. Like you're not running from conversations that could change things." Your soulmate stared. Because they didn't know anyone could see that. They didn't know they had been changing loudly enough for it to be visible from the outside. And the interpreter continued, voice soft but steady. They listened. Their mouth didn't do the hesitation. No pause. No hidden smile. No editing. Your soulmate's fingers tightened. What did they say? The interpreter held their gaze. They said a full sentence, they said. Clear. No retreat. Your soulmate's heart hammered. What sentence? The interpreter took a breath. And then they said the words that didn't promise an ending, but opened a beginning so quietly it felt inevitable. They said, "Then maybe we can finally talk differently." Your soulmate didn't move. Because in that sentence, they heard everything you hadn't said. Not, "I love you," in fireworks. Not, "I choose you," like a movie. But something more human. More dangerous. More real. A willingness to stop performing safety and start building it. Your soulmate swallowed. And in the silence that followed, something in them shifted. Not into certainty. Into courage. Because suddenly they understood what this story was actually about. It was never about decoding your mouth. It was about recognizing that you've been trying to protect something, maybe both of you. From being named too early, judged too quickly, pressured into clarity before it could grow roots. And now, the roots might be there. Now, the fear that used to follow your honesty might be loosening its grip. Now, the hesitation that used to live on your lips might be shorter, or gone, not because the feeling disappeared, but because you're finally strong enough to let the words exist without hating yourself for wanting what you want. Your soulmate sat there, mind flashing through every unfinished moment. Every time you inhaled and chose a safer sentence. Every time you smiled a fraction too late. Every time your eyes said something your mouth wouldn't carry. And then your soulmate did something different. They stopped asking what your expressions meant. They asked what you would need. Not from the future. Not from fate. From them. What would make it safe, your soulmate whispered, mostly to themselves. The interpreter didn't answer that, because they couldn't. Because the only person who could answer it was you. But the interpreter did say one last thing, one final detail about yesterday that your soulmate hadn't heard yet. They said, "There's something else. The reason I broke the promise now." Your soulmate's eyes sharpened. "You said you promised them." "I did," the interpreter said. "And I kept it. 4 months. Then why tell me now?" The interpreter's jaw tightened. "Because the condition they were waiting for," they said, "it might not exist anymore." Your soulmate frowned. "What condition?" The interpreter looked at them like they needed to understand the gravity before they were allowed to hold the fact. "They told me once," the interpreter said, "that they couldn't speak freely while something in their life was unresolved. Something that made them feel like they were still standing between an old version of themselves and the person they were trying to become." Your soulmate's stomach turned.